One of mankind's oldest forms of combat has become one of the most dominant and oldest sports in history. Even if you've never wrestled yourself, odds are you know somebody or have seen the sport on television. As for myself, I discovered wrestling during middle school, where I ended up participating throughout all of high school. Today, I coach a youth program alongside with some of the mentors and coaches that I had myself during the sport in high school. So, to get a little more in depth on the sport, we'll have to look at the history. We'll have to also look at the styles that the sport has to offer and some of the greatest that the sports have ever had. Wrestling. As an article stated by UWW, the United World of Wrestling, the Greeks saw the sport as a science. They also looked at it as a divine art, but most importantly, they used the sport as a training method for young men. These young men were trained in order to participate in the Olympics. At the time, for the Greeks, the wrestling was the most important for the Pan Am Games as it decided factor of the winner. It wasn't until the Roman times when the sport saw its lowest. The Romans really pushed away the Greek games and brought in the idea that wrestling was more for the elites. It wasn't until 1896 that the Olympics brought back wrestling. As is stated on the Olympics website in September of 2001, one of 9 original sports featured on the 1896 Summer Olympic Games, Greco-Roman, holds a special place in the Olympics history. So now that we have a little bit of history of this sport, we can go into depth on some styles. As I found on sportsengine.com in an article stating 3 of today's styles of wrestling: folk style, Greco-Roman, and freestyle. But we can start with folk style, as it's the collegiate level of wrestling, meaning that it's what you see in wrestling, high schools, and colleges. The main difference between this style and the other 2 styles is that on bottom, you hold your position and you just don't want to get turned or you want to escape. The other 2 sport styles, Greco-Roman and freestyle, are considered the international Olympic styles. The difference between these 2 styles is that in Greco-Roman, you would not be allowed to score from the waist down, meaning leg attacks and trips would be illegal during a Greco-Roman freestyle match. Like I mentioned, they are both an Olympic form of wrestling. Now that we have the styles and a little bit of history on the sport, I can tell you about some of the greatest that the sport has ever had. So let me tell you about first wrestler that comes to mind, and that would be Milo Croton. As an Olympian and Fitness Hall of Famer, John Abdo stated in his book, Wolves of Croton, The Untold Story of Milo, greatest wrestler of all time, undisputed strongest man in history. Milo of Croton was said to have unorthodox forms of training, as there are many paintings and stories told of Milo carrying a bull on his back as endurance in training and strength training. Milo went on to win 6 Olympic titles in wrestling in a row from 536 to 520 BC, and many other championships throughout his career, as stories are told and paintings are had of Milo, the strongest and undisputed man. That takes me to Dan Gable. I would like to read you a quote by Dan Gable that states, "More enduringly than any other sport, wrestling teaches self-control, pride, and some have wrestled with great skills, but none have wrestled without pride." Dan Gable. He had one of the most outstanding wrestling careers of all time. Dan Gable from prep to college, he had a record of 181-1. Dan Gable participated in college in Iowa State University, where he accomplished many titles and lost his first match ever up to that date. He lost at his last match of his college career. But college wasn't the only time that Dan Gable stood out. Dan Gable went on to win many championships and world titles in the Olympics. One of his most famed Olympics was his medal in 1972 at the Summer Olympics in Munich, Germany, where he did not surrender one single point. The Slovakians came to the Olympics with one goal in mind, and that was to defeat Dan Gable, where they did not accomplish their goals. Dan Gable then went on to be named Wrestler of the 20th Century by Gannett News. He ended up winning Iowa's top sports figure in the past 100 years. Dan Gable was also by UWW Hall of Famer Legends of the Sport, only third person in the world to have this honor bestowed upon them at the time. This is the information I found on Dan Gable's website on his bibliography. Dan Gable was also pronounced by ESPN top coaches of the 20th century. These are some of the greatest wrestlers that I have encountered throughout the sport, as well as some of the styles and history of the sport. I hope that this speech really informed you on. Most importantly, at the end of this speech, I really hope that the next time that you come across wrestling on TV, or you have the chance to see a local wrestling match, I hope you stop and think how old this sport is, how much dedication and devotion this sport has taken, and most importantly, the work ethic that was put into this tradition that today we call a sport. Thank you.